I am pleased to be asked to introduce an international stateswoman and a congresswoman, a person who I've come to admire so over the years. Actually, if you look at her, she looks like she's my sister. She looks like my family. I not first paid attention to her, but she hit me right square between the eyes during the Katrina hearings. I was watching TV and I saw this little bundle of energy bouncing around the hearing room up there. And I just thought how it was just awful that our government responded or didn't respond to all of that human disaster down in Louisiana. And it looks like it's going to hit it again there soon. We certainly hope not. But I was impressed with her energy, her sincerity, and how she works in the interest of the people. And that's what I love, somebody who cares about the people and actually work in the interest of the people. Now, who in here, in this room, can't remember who the first person was to call George Bush out about that war? Yeah. It was our honored guest that was the first person that called George Bush out about that war. And we are still grateful for her. She was right. She was right then. She's been right for the last 7 years. And she is still right. She's still right. That's right. So this was my job, and I'm really honored to present to you the Green Party candidate for President of the United States of America, Cynthia McKinny.
I love the name, Call Them Out, because it represents a new level of accountability that the people will demand. At one point, it was sufficient for us to just go to the polls and vote. But I don't think we heard Dr. King when he mentioned that it was not enough for us just to fight for the right of the Negro in Mississippi to vote, but that we also had to fight for the right of the Negro in New York City to have something for which to vote. And people have gotten into office and forgotten about the people who put them there. And there's no organization more needed now than an organization like Call Them Out. Because we've got to call them out, and then we got to put them out.
All right.
It was not too far from here, over in Chicago, a young man who should have had the opportunity to spend 27 years representing Chicago in the Congress, should have had the opportunity perhaps to be the mayor of Chicago, but instead he was murdered in his bed. He was murdered while he slept, and his pregnant girlfriend lay beside him. Fred Hampton said that we're sick and tired of answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain, and conclusions that don't conclude. We have been saddled with a political elite that give us only that. And so now it is clear that if I can come to the city of Detroit and we see an audience like this, where people from all backgrounds have come together for one purpose only, and that's to stop the lies of our government, to take our country back, to get what we truly deserve, and we're not afraid to be radical in the pursuit of what it is that we deserve, of government, of, for, and by us. That's right. Then it is clear that all over our country, there are pockets of people who are ready to resist.
That's right. That's right.
I am so glad. I always have to pay homage to the visionaries of the Green Party, who 20 years ago understood that there was only a paradigm of control in the two-party system. And so they stepped outside of the box. They stepped outside of that thought control, that behavior control, and they created a new political entity that could represent truly our values.
Okay. All right.
Now, you know, I was a little bit late coming to the party. I always believed that I had green values, but it took me a while to join the Green Party. But honey, I am so glad that I am here now. I believe that the majority of people in this country also share green values, because in November of 2006, we know that the voters of this country went to the polls and they voted for peace. But instead they got war. They got more war. They got threats of more war. And they're getting more occupation. The last thing they're getting is what they voted for is peace. We know that in November when people went to the polls to vote, they also thought that they were going to get a modicum of change in the healthcare delivery system of this country. That perhaps we could get a single-payer healthcare system in this country, like people in the Netherlands have, like people in Canada have, like people in the United Kingdom have, people who have better health statistics have a single-payer Medicare for all type of healthcare delivery system. And I was doing a bit of research, and the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, put out a press release. And they said that Americans are living longer now than they've ever lived before. That's a wonderful milestone. But what they didn't say is that even at that, we're 42nd in the world. Because other countries understand how to make an investment in their human population and to make that investment pay dividends back in improved health statistics. Now we know that a single-payer healthcare system is a value that is felt by the majority of the grassroots Democratic Party activists in this country. But the Democratic Party doesn't even have a compunction to provide for its own grassroots activists public policy that reflects their values. Why? Because they've allowed some special interests to come into the room. And so the Democratic Party represents those special interests, and they're willing to kick to the curb the values of the people who even vote for them. With respect to impeachment, how can Nancy Pelosi take impeachment off the table?
No.
But even more than that, I know John Conyers. I know John Conyers is a strong, proud, dignified man.
Yeah.
How can he bend over completely and answer to Nancy Pelosi instead of to us? Millions of people in this country and people around the world watched as the Republican Party established a new standard for impeachment. All you got to do is have a little affair on your wife, lie about it, maybe under oath lie about it to the people, and what happens? $40 million gets spent investigating your lie to your wife and to all of us. That is the standard that has been set for impeachment. But lying to the American people, that's all right, according to the Democrats' values. Spying on innocent American people, that's all right, according to democratic values. Starting a war and killing innocent people, that's all right, according to democratic leaders' values. And so instead of us getting accountable government, and instead of us even having an opposition party that acts like an opposition party, we've got complicity. And the Democratic national leadership now have made themselves complicit in rendition, torture, crimes against humanity, crimes against the peace, crimes against the United States Constitution, crimes against the Bill of Rights, crimes against the American people, and crimes against the global community. So I gave myself a birthday present last year. It was the coldest day to be outside. I was standing in front of the Pentagon, and there I declared my independence from the national leadership that had provided us $720 million a day for war, but nothing in terms of the repeal of these laws that have been passed that are affronts to our civil liberties, the Patriot Acts, the Secret Evidence Act, the Military Commissions Act, the Funding for the War on Terror Act, all impingements on our civil liberties. They had done nothing to provide a single-payer health care system, to subsidize education in this country. Why is it that we can spend $720 million a day for war, but we can't subsidize education so that young people who want to get a university education can't graduate without being tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? By their failure to represent the values of even their own grassroots activists, people who believe in them, and yet that with their determination to become complicit with the crimes of the Bush administration, they failed to repeal the Bush tax cuts. How many times did you hear the Democrats rail against the Bush tax cuts? The truth about the Bush tax cuts is that they have ushered in income inequality unseen in this country since the Great Depression. We are truly now a country of haves and have-nots. Actually, not even halves. As George Bush described what his base was, he said his base were the haves and the have-mores. So now we've got a country of have-mores and have-nothings. And that's the rest of us. The Bush tax cuts have helped to put this country trillions of dollars in debt. A debt that is an unsustainable debt. A debt that David Walker, the former Comptroller General of our country, says that we can't pay back. $53 trillion. And David Walker says that if all of the debts and obligations of this country were called in on one day, we'd be bankrupt. What kind of economic stewardship have both the Democrats and Republicans provided for us? Nothing at all. Nothing at all. Certainly not a reflection of our values. And then, with respect to foreclosures, through this foreclosure crisis that too many homeowners are feeling in this country, this country has experienced the greatest transfer of wealth in modern U.S. history. $92 billion lost by the African American community, $98 billion lost by the Latino community. Why? Because the Congress and the executive branch allowed the banks to get away with predatory lending.
Right.
And so when families need a bailout tighten their belts. But the banks can get a bailout from all of our tax dollars. Reverend Pinckney, I first heard about Reverend Pinckney and Benton Harbor when there was a police incident in Benton Harbor. A young man on a motorcycle was rammed by the police and he subsequently died. And Benton Harbor erupted in our own type of intifada for 3 days. The NAACP rushed in and said, forgive. Let's pray for peace. Now, I don't mind praying for peace, but at the end of the day, we need justice.
Yeah.
On the day after I received the nomination, Rosa and I received the nomination from the Green Party, I decided to visit church. And I'm a lifelong Catholic, kind of strayed away from the church, or maybe the church strayed away from me. And there was a Catholic priest, though, who excited my imagination. And he just happened to have his church in Chicago. So I went. And that Sunday, Father Michael Flager preached to us. And I knew that that sermon was specially for me. But he told us, he said, it's all right to be radical. Because only when we are radical is when we get what we deserve, when we get what we need. Because when we're radical, we're willing to step outside of the box of conformity. We're willing to step outside and say and do things that maybe people might not understand. We are willing to let other people call us whatever names come to mind. But we are radical in the faith that we can move and change our circumstances. And then after we step outside of the box of conformity and understand that it's okay to be radical in order to get what we deserve, to get what we need, then he also said, don't ever apologize for being free. People all over the world are liberating themselves.
That's right.
And I want to give the example, the latest example happened in our South, in Paraguay, where a former Catholic priest who is an adherent to liberation theology was just sworn in as president of that country. How? Because the electorate was free enough to vote their values instead of their fears. This has happened from Haiti to Cote d'Ivoire to Brazil and Venezuela, Argentina and Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, Nicaragua, now Paraguay. We add India, we add Spain. Why not here?
That's right.
I want to say something also about some very brave people in Mexico. Because we don't get the news
Right.
about our neighbor to the south and the valiant stand that people in Mexico are taking against U.S. encroachment on their patrimony. But the people of Mexico, first of all, they sustained a stolen presidential election.
Right.
And the president who was installed is not the president who is reflective of the values of the people who went to vote in Mexico. But what happened is when people showed up at the polls to vote, their names weren't on the list. And that happened so many times that they got an incorrect result. But what did the people of Mexico do? They formed a shadow government. They shut down Mexico City for 5 months. And now, the people of Mexico have formed several organizations. One of them, I just want to mention briefly, is an organization that defends the right of people in Mexico to not have to leave their families, their homes, their community, their country, in order to come to work here and be mistreated here in this country. They have formed an organization that defends the right of people of Mexico not to immigrate, not to have to immigrate. But we must understand that the reason that they have to immigrate is because of the Democratic Party's policies in NAFTA, CAFTA, and the free trade agreement, so-called free trade agreements that have been enacted by our hand. And then by our hand, we subject other people to the whims and prerogatives of powers far greater than they. The people of Mexico, however, have just concluded a referendum. It was a referendum that was not sanctioned by the government, but they had over 80% participation. They defied the government in order to say, we will not allow the United States to privatize our water. We will not allow the United States to privatize our electricity, and we will not allow the United States to steal our oil. Elections have we had stolen in this country? And what has our response been? And so now we're going to do the same thing that we've always done, and I'm sure we'll get the same thing that we've always gotten. And there's some people who would say, well, the Green Party was responsible for George Bush being in the White House. No, it's Republican theft and Democratic Party complicity that is responsible. 1 million black people went to the polls in 2000 and voted, and their votes were not even counted. 900,000 of those votes went to the Democratic Party because black people vote 9 out of 10 for the Democratic Party. And yet the Democratic Party didn't even defend black votes. They didn't do it in 2000. They didn't do it in 2004. And as the Republicans now are codifying a two-tiered election system in this country with voter ID laws and the voter caging, which is a fancy way of saying they're purging people's names from the list, do we expect that the Democrats are going to be there to defend the rights of voters to have their votes counted in 2008? No. I don't think so. But in 2004, the Green Party was there. The Green Party put people on the ground, filed lawsuits, filed FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, got the information. 2 people have already been sentenced for illegal activity, and more will come. Say that I am happy to be in a room of people who are not afraid to be radical, who are not afraid to step outside of the box of conformity, the box of thought control, into the political reality that too many are facing in this country. And I am very pleased to be in a room that looks like this, because as a student of the counterintelligence program, I can tell you that the government's worst nightmare was that black people and white people and brown people and Asian people and Native American people, all people would come together to move this country forward. Now we have an example of when we came together and moved this country forward, we actually were able to do that. And so if we are able to come together with critical enough numbers, we can do it again. I remain convinced that we can do it again. And what we do today is not in vain. I am happy to have a new team. My team is Harley and Clyde and Derek and Margaret and Eric and Matt and George and Diane and Douglas and Richard and Lou. Lou. Richard?
I'm the guy that started.
Oh, and Bill, that's right. Yeah, and Bill. So now Rahm Emanuel is quoted to have said that I wasn't a team player. You bet your life I'm never going to be a part of that team ever again.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming here. Thank you for participating in this wonderful rally. Thank you for being independent thinkers and being willing to analyze our situation critically. And in the end, to vote your values and to vote green. Thank you very much.